And then let's talk about President Donald Trump, tariffs, Mexico, the president's relationship with Republicans right now. And a large part of this story started on Thursday when Trump tweeted that the United States would be imposing tariffs on all Mexican goods, writing, "On June 10th, the United States will impose a 5% tariff on all goods coming into our country from Mexico until such time as illegal migrants coming through Mexico and into our country stop. The tariff will gradually increase until the illegal immigration problem is remedied, at which time the tariffs will be removed. Details from the White House to follow." And a little while later, the White House issued a statement saying that the tariffs would rise by 5% every month after June, increasing to 10% in July, 15% in August, and so on until they became 25% in October, at which point tariffs will permanently remain at the 25% level unless and until Mexico substantially stops the illegal inflow of aliens coming through its territory. And following this announcement, wouldn't you know it, those damn liberals, they came out and they lived it up and they said they did not support our president. Liberals like Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz. I'm joking. Obviously, the Democrats had a problem with this, but there also didn't seem to be a lot of Republican support. In fact, just yesterday, there were reports that a group of Republican senators told administration officials in a closed-door meeting that they were all opposed to the tariffs. After that meeting, we saw Senate Majority Leader and Republican Mitch McConnell say,
"Well, there is not much support in my conference for tariffs, that's for sure. Our hope is that the tariffs will be avoided and will not have to answer any hypotheticals."
We also saw Ted Cruz coming out against the tariffs and telling reporters, "I will yield to nobody in passion and seriousness and commitment for securing the border." But there's no reason for Texas farmers and ranchers and manufacturers and small businesses to pay the price of massive new taxes. Senator John Kennedy telling reporters,
"I think it's a mistake. I'm not saying we don't have a crisis on the border. We do, clearly."
Senator Mitt Romney saying, "I do not favor tariffs being applied to friends like Mexico." Other Republican senators have also warned that they would try to block the tariffs, with some even arguing that they would get enough support among Republicans to get a veto-proof majority. Senator Ron Johnson telling reporters, "The administration ought to be concerned about another vote of disapproval on another National Emergency Act, this time trying to implement tariffs. Tariffs are not real popular in the Republican conference." And other Republicans have backed this claim, including senators like Rand Paul and Kevin Cramer. Now, as far as if they would actually oppose the president, that remains to be seen. As far as Trump's opinion, he was asked by a reporter if he thought Republicans would block the tariffs, and he does not appear to believe they would.
No, I don't think they will do that. I think if they do, it's foolish.
Although I do want to point out, it's not like all Republicans are against this. There are definitely key Senate Republicans who back Trump here. For example, we saw Marco Rubio tweet, "The law provides POTUS broad authority to control transactions with other nations if there is an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and or economy of the U.S. Unlawful migration and drug flow transiting through Mexico into U.S. clearly poses such a threat." And we saw Senator Tom Tillis also expressing support for the tariffs, telling reporters, "I think Mexico could help us solve the crisis down at the border." And adding, "What's the tax on handling 80,000 additional illegal immigrants coming across the border, housing them, adjudicating them? You've got to look at the total cost of the prices." And on the note of tariffs, I wanted to kind of take a moment to talk about the money involved. I think for some, when I've talked with them, there's a confusion about what's actually happening. And it also helps answer the question of, well, why are Republicans so against the tariff? And it ultimately comes down to two key points. The first is the economic impact. Because while President Trump claims that these tariffs are a punishment for Mexico, many economists argue that the cost will largely be the burden of U.S. businesses and consumers. And that's because tariffs are paid by the companies that import products. So you have U.S. businesses that are required to pay the import penalties, and so it's just basic business that the extra cost is then often passed along to the consumer. And understand, this is a broad consensus among experts, not just liberals versus conservatives. According to Dan Ikenson, who leads trade studies at the conservative Cato Institute think tank, U.S. tariffs are taxes on American households and businesses, so imposing them will always be an act of self-destruction. Economists also agree that because tariffs function like a regressive tax, the negative impacts are far more likely to impact lower-income communities. And in addition to consumers being hit, the two biggest business sectors that are going to be hit are the auto industry and the agriculture sector. And specifically, according to Ikenson, motor vehicles and motor vehicle parts accounted for 1/3 of the value of all U.S. imports from Mexico, and much of that cross-border trade was an unfinished product. Further explaining, in other words, the factory floor spans the U.S.-Mexican border, so imposing tariffs is akin to erecting a concrete wall through the middle of that factory. And in fact, on that note, just yesterday we saw the news that Toyota told Reuters that the tariffs on Mexico could cost its major suppliers $1 billion. And it's not just higher costs, tariffs also cause job losses as well. And according to a new report from the Perryman Group, an economic research firm, the overall job loss would be about 406,000. And adding, the proposed tariffs would lead to an increase in direct costs of about $28.1 billion each year. And the second reason we're seeing some Republicans oppose the tariffs is because they worry that this could derail ongoing negotiations with the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. Right, which if you don't remember is Trump's replacement for NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Efforts to negotiate this new deal were advanced just last week. Officials in both Mexico and the United States started pushing their congressional congressional arms to ratify the treaty. We even saw Vice President Mike Pence going to the Canadian capital to promote the deal. Trump had also recently agreed to lift the tariffs on steel and aluminum. Canada and Mexico then responded by lifting tariffs on U.S. products. And so now you have experts and lawmakers worrying that the new wave of tariffs could send a contradictory message. And this was echoed in a statement by Republican Senator Chuck Grassley, who notably chairs the Senate Finance Committee, which notably is one of the bodies responsible for overseeing this agreement, saying, "I support nearly every one of President Trump's immigration policies, but this is not one of them." But main point, we are where we are right now. What happens next? What can Mexico do? Well, right now it's a little bit unclear. Today Mexico's foreign minister is set to meet with Vice President Mike Pence in Washington to discuss the tariffs. Mexican authorities have said that they are willing to cooperate, but have pushed for talks rather than economic retaliation. In a letter to President Trump, Mexican President AMLO said that he did not want a confrontation and emphasized the need for dialogue writing. Social problems are not resolved with taxes or coercive measures. There's also been the question of how much Mexico can really do to stop the migrant flows, because according to reports, Mexico has actually dramatically stepped up immigration enforcement recently. They have tripled their monthly deportations since the beginning of 2019. Just last month, they reportedly apprehended more than 22,000 unauthorized migrants, which is the highest monthly number in Mexico's history. But also experts and reports say that Mexico actually largely lacks the resources to deal with the influx of migrants coming from Central America, with a big part of it reportedly being that Mexico uses a lot of its police and military resources combating organized crime. And so they don't have those extra resources, and their immigration authorities are already completely overwhelmed. Also, as far as what happens next, we're seeing a fight for power between Congress and the president. And the reason for that is you have congressional leaders who have been questioning Trump's efforts to unilaterally impose the tariff. Usually, it is the authority of Congress and not the president to raise taxes and tariffs. However, as has been previously mentioned by people in the story, the president can access the power by declaring that certain circumstances amount to a threat to national security. So that's exactly what Trump has done. But you've had people push back on this, like Grassley, who has criticized Trump's efforts as a misuse of presidential tariff authority, saying that it is counter to congressional intent, continuing trade policy and border security are separate issues. Which, we've already talked about this so much, but there's also another fight happening in Congress. Just today, we saw a bipartisan group of senators saying that they would pass resolutions to block Trump's $8 billion arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And if that's news to you, last month, the Trump administration declared that the threats posed by Iran were an emergency that required the administration to approve a massive arms deal, notably without congressional approval. And the pushback against Trump here even includes key Trump allies like Senator Lindsey Graham. And according to Reuters, Graham said in a statement, "While I understand that Saudi Arabia is a strategic ally, the behavior of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman cannot be ignored. Now is not the time to do business as usual with Saudi Arabia." And so obviously these are separate stories, but there is a theme here. And that is that there might be a bipartisan effort in Congress to crack down on President Trump taking more power by just kind of declaring emergencies. But ultimately, that is where we are right now. I know that, talking tariffs and the battle for power in Congress, it's not a sexy story, but it's a very important story. And one that, of course, like with everything, I'd love to know your thoughts.